The crystal chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars above the crowded concert hall. Outside, luxury cars lined up one after another, dropping off guests in expensive suits and glittering gowns. This wasn't just any evening. This was the charity event everyone in the city had been talking about for months. The kind of night where being seen mattered almost as much as the cause itself. Inside the grand entrance, waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. The bubbles caught the light as glasses clinked together in toast after toast. Laughter echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings. Women showed off diamond necklaces that probably cost more than most people's houses. Men discussed business deals between sips of expensive wine. Everyone seemed to know everyone, or at least they pretended to. At the center of all this attention stood Vincent Laurent. He was the reason most of these people had bought their tickets tonight, a pianist whose name appeared on concert posters from New York to Tokyo. His fingers had danced across piano keys in the most famous halls around the world. Critics wrote articles praising his technique. Music students studied his recordings like they were sacred texts. At 42 years old, Vincent had reached the peak of his profession, and he knew it. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone completely comfortable being the star of the show. A smile here, a handshake there, a kiss on the cheek for the wealthy women who funded these events. Vincent had mastered this dance years ago. He understood that being a successful musician wasn't just about playing beautiful music. It was about playing the game, making the right people feel special, saying the right things at the right moments. "Vincent, darling," a woman in a red dress that probably cost more than a car grabbed his arm. "You simply must tell everyone about the piece you're performing tonight. I've been dying to hear about it." Vincent launched into his well-practiced explanation about the Rachmaninoff concerto he'd chosen, how difficult it was, how few pianists could truly master it, how he'd spent months perfecting every single note. The small group around him hung on every word. They nodded appreciatively, even though most of them probably couldn't tell Rachmaninoff from Beethoven if their lives depended on it. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the show, the spectacle, the feeling of being part of something important and exclusive. The main hall where the concert would take place stood behind heavy velvet curtains. But here in the reception area, a smaller grand piano sat on display like a piece of art. Its black surface gleamed under the lights, polished to perfection. Someone had placed a massive flower arrangement on top of it, roses and lilies that filled the air with their heavy perfume. As Vincent talked and charmed his audience, his eyes wandered across the room. Years of performing had taught him to read a crowd, to notice who was important, who wanted attention, who was worth his time. His gaze swept past the usual faces until it landed on someone completely out of place. Near the piano, standing alone with her back partially turned to the crowd, was a woman who clearly didn't belong. At least that's what Vincent thought at first glance. While everyone else wore designer clothes and jewelry, she had on a simple dark dress that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack. No sparkle, no shine, nothing to catch the eye. Her shoes were practical and worn. Her hair was pulled back in a plain style that required no expensive salon visit. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Vincent's attention. It was the way she looked at the piano. She stood there completely still, ignoring the party happening around her, staring at the instrument like it was the only thing in the room. Her eyes traced along its curves with an intensity that seemed strange for someone at a social event. Vincent watched her for a moment, curious despite himself. Who was she? Definitely not one of the wealthy donors. Maybe someone's assistant who had wandered into the wrong area. Or perhaps she worked for the catering company and had gotten distracted. A couple standing nearby noticed her too. The man leaned toward his wife and whispered something. They both looked over and laughed quietly behind their champagne glasses. Vincent saw the woman glance their way, catching their mockery, but she didn't move. She just turned back to the piano, unbothered or perhaps too absorbed to care. There was something about the moment that planted an idea in Vincent's mind. An opportunity for entertainment. The kind of spontaneous moment that people would talk about later. That would make the evening memorable for reasons beyond just his scheduled performance. He excused himself from his admirers and started moving toward the piano. As he walked, he caught the attention of several people who turned to watch where he was going. By the time he reached the woman, he had an audience forming behind him. Vincent had always been good at reading rooms, at knowing what would get a reaction. And right now, with all these wealthy, slightly bored people looking for something interesting to happen, he saw his moment. The woman still hadn't moved. She stood there with a glass of water in her hand, not champagne like everyone else, still focused on that piano with unusual concentration. Up close, Vincent noticed details he'd missed from across the room. Her hands resting on the glass showed signs of hard work. They weren't the soft, manicured hands of the women in designer gowns. These were hands that had scrubbed and cleaned and worked. Her face had lines that spoke of years and struggles. This wasn't someone who spent afternoons at the spa, but her eyes, those were different. When she finally seemed to sense his presence and glanced his way, Vincent saw something in them he hadn't expected. A depth, a knowledge, something that made him pause for just a split second before his performer's instinct took over. The crowd behind him had grown. People sensed something interesting was about to happen. They gathered closer, champagne glasses in hand, ready to be entertained. This was exactly what Vincent wanted. All eyes on him, waiting to see what the famous pianist would do next. The woman turned fully now, realizing she'd become the center of attention. Vincent saw a flash of something cross her face. Not fear exactly, but awareness. She understood what was happening, what she represented to these people in their expensive clothes and jewelry. The moment hung there, suspended like a note held too long. The chatter in the room had quieted. Even the waiters had stopped moving, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Vincent stood tall, confident, master of this moment like he was master of any stage. Behind him, someone giggled. The sound broke the silence like a stone dropped in still water. More quiet laughter followed. The wealthy crowd found the situation amusing already, and nothing had even happened yet. A plainly dressed woman, clearly not one of them, standing alone at the piano like she belonged there. Like she had any right to be in their world. Vincent felt the crowd's energy, their anticipation. They wanted a show, and he was about to give them one. He straightened his expensive jacket, put on his most charming smile, and prepared to speak. The famous pianist was about to make someone's evening very uncomfortable, and everyone in that glittering hall was ready to watch it happen. Vincent cleared his throat loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. The theatrical gesture was deliberate, practiced from years of commanding audiences. He wanted every eye in that reception hall fixed on this moment he was about to create. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet. The words were polite, but his tone carried something else underneath, something that made people lean forward with anticipation. The woman looked directly at him now. Her face showed no particular emotion, which somehow made Vincent want to push harder. Most people would have blushed or stammered by now, uncomfortable under the scrutiny of so many wealthy, judgmental eyes. "I couldn't help but notice your fascination with this magnificent instrument," Vincent continued, gesturing toward the piano with a flourish. Behind him, he heard someone snicker. Good. The crowd was with him. "Tell me, do you play?" It was a loaded question, and everyone knew it. The way he asked made it clear he already knew the answer, or thought he did. This woman, in her discount store dress with her work-worn hands, couldn't possibly play piano. Not really. Maybe she'd taken a few lessons as a child, pecked out some simple children's songs. That's what Vincent assumed, what everyone assumed. The woman took a slow sip of her water before answering. "I have played, yes," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but steady, with an accent that suggested she hadn't been born in this country. "Wonderful." Vincent clapped his hands together, playing up his enthusiasm for his audience. "Then perhaps you would honor us all with a small performance before the evening's main event?" He gestured toward the piano bench with exaggerated courtesy, like a king offering a peasant his throne as a joke. The laughter came louder now. Not everyone joined in, but enough people did to fill the space with cruel amusement. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband behind her hand. A young man in an expensive suit actually pointed, shaking his head in disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. Vincent saw exactly what he expected to see in their faces. These people spent thousands of dollars on tickets to hear real musicians, trained professionals who had dedicated their lives to their craft. The idea of this random woman, this nobody in Chia, clothes sitting at that piano was ridiculous, insulting even, and that's exactly what made it entertaining. "Oh, I don't think that would be appropriate," the woman said, starting to turn away. "Nonsense." Vincent moved to block her path, gently but firmly. His smile never wavered. "We have time before the program begins. And clearly you appreciate fine instruments. This is a Steinway Grand, you know, one of the finest pianos money can buy. When will you get another chance to play something of this quality?" He said it like he was doing her a favor, offering her a gift she could never afford on her own. Several people in the crowd nodded along, buying completely into his performance. The woman's eyes moved from Vincent to the piano, then to the growing crowd of spectators. For a moment, something flickered across her face that Vincent couldn't quite read. It might have been resignation, or maybe calculation, or perhaps something else entirely. "I haven't played in front of people in a very long time," she said. "Even better." Vincent spread his arms wide, addressing the crowd now as much as the woman. "A rusty amateur attempting to play for an audience of music lovers. This should be quite educational for everyone. We'll all gain a new appreciation for just how difficult it is to master the piano." More laughter. Someone actually applauded sarcastically. Vincent felt the rush of controlling the room, of having everyone exactly where he wanted them. This was power in its own way. Not the power of beautiful music, but the power of social dynamics, of knowing how to work a crowd. The woman set down her glass of water on a nearby table. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She brushed her hands against her dress, smoothing fabric that didn't need smoothing. Vincent wondered if she was stalling, looking for an excuse to escape. That would be disappointing, though still amusing. "Which piece would you like me to play?" she asked. Vincent hadn't expected that question. For a second he hesitated. Then his performer's instinct kicked back in. "Oh, whatever you'd like," he said with a dismissive wave. "Something simple, perhaps? Chopsticks? Mary Had a Little Lamb?" The crowd ate it up, more laughter rippling through the gathered spectators. "You choose," the woman said, looking directly at him, "since you know the piano so well." There was something in the way she said it that gave Vincent momentary pause. But he was too caught up in the performance now, too committed to the bit. He pretended to think deeply, tapping his chin. "How about Chopin?" he suggested, naming one of the most technically demanding composers in classical music. "Perhaps an etude?" Studies, as they were called, pieces specifically written to be difficult, to challenge even professional pianists. The suggestion was absurd, and everyone knew it. Several people actually gasped at the audacity. It was like asking someone who'd never run a day in their life to sprint a marathon. The cruelty of it hung in the air, tangible and uncomfortable for anyone with a shred of empathy. But the woman just nodded. "Chopin, an etude." "Very well." She walked toward the piano bench. The crowd parted to let her through, everyone staying well back as if they might catch something from getting too close to her. Vincent followed, then leaned casually against the side of the piano, arms crossed, his posture screaming confidence and barely contained amusement. Someone had to move the flower arrangement off the piano's top. A waiter hurried over to help, carefully lifting the heavy vase and carrying it away. The piano stood exposed now, its sleek black surface reflecting the chandelier lights above. The woman sat on the bench. She adjusted her position slightly, moving forward then back, finding the right distance. Her hands rested on her lap for a moment. Vincent noticed they were trembling slightly. Nerves, he thought. She's finally realizing what a mistake this is. "Whenever you're ready," he said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. Behind him, someone's phone camera flashed. People were already recording this moment, ready to share the awkward spectacle with friends who couldn't make it to the event. The woman's hands rose slowly toward the keys. Vincent felt the crowd hold its collective breath. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The crash, the failure, the embarrassment that would confirm everything they believed about people like her versus people like them. Her fingers touched the keys so lightly at first that Vincent couldn't hear anything. Then she pressed down, playing a single note. It rang out clear and pure in the now silent hall. Just one note held for a long moment. Then her hands moved, and the world Vincent knew shattered into 1,000 pieces. The opening of Chopin's revolutionary etude exploded from the piano like thunder. Not the hesitant, fumbling sounds everyone expected, but a torrent of perfectly executed notes. Her left hand ran up and down the lower keys with impossible speed, while her right hand played the melody above. The piece was nicknamed Revolutionary for a reason. It was fierce, angry, demanding. Written by Chopin in response to political upheaval in his homeland, every note carried emotion and power. And this woman played it like she'd been born to do nothing else. Vincent's arms uncrossed. His casual lean against the piano straightened into rigid attention. His mouth fell open slightly, his carefully maintained expression of amused superiority melting away like ice in the sun. Behind him, the laughter had died completely. The crowd stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to lips, conversations cut off mid-word. The only sound in the entire hall was the piano, and it filled every corner with music that demanded attention, that commanded respect. The woman's hands flew across the keys. The technical difficulty of what she was playing would have been impressive from any trained pianist. But it wasn't just technical skill on display. It was art. She shaped each phrase with understanding, drew out emotional depth that most professionals spent years trying to achieve. Her entire body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling, completely absorbed in the moment. Vincent watched her hands, trying to understand what he was seeing. Those work-worn fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a dancer. The muscle memory was so ingrained that she didn't even seem to think about what came next. She just knew, the way someone knows their own name. The revolutionary etude built to its climax. The left hand became a cascading waterfall of notes, each one distinct despite the incredible speed. The right hand soared above with the melody, crying out with passion and pain and triumph all at once. It was the sound of a human soul expressed through 88 keys, and then as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The final chord rang out, powerful and definite. The woman's hands lifted from the keys, hovering for a moment before settling back into her lap. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent stared at her, his mind trying to process what had just happened. Around him, the crowd remained frozen, trapped in the moment between expectation and reality. Someone's champagne glass slipped from numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound finally breaking the spell. Then the applause came, not polite charity event clapping, but real applause, thunderous, amazed, the kind usually reserved for the main performance. People who'd been laughing moments ago now clapped until their hands hurt, their faces showing shock and shame and awe all mixed together. The woman stood up from the bench. She smoothed her simple dress one more time, picked up her glass of water from where she'd left it, and prepared to walk away as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if she hadn't just turned the entire evening upside down. As if she hadn't just revealed that Vincent Laurent, the famous pianist, the master of the stage, knew absolutely nothing about the person he'd chosen to mock. Vincent's feet seemed rooted to the floor. He watched the woman take a few steps away from the piano, moving through the stunned crowd like she was just passing through a regular room, rather than a space where she'd just done the impossible. The applause continued, growing even louder. People who'd been filming on their phones held them higher now, capturing every second. A few guests had tears streaming down their faces, moved by the raw emotion in the performance. Others just stood there shaking their heads in disbelief, looking between the woman and Vincent like they were trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Vincent finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Wait," he called out. "Please wait." The woman paused but didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was calm, almost neutral. Nothing in her face suggested triumph or anger or vindication. She just looked tired, like someone who'd carried a heavy weight for too long. "Who are you?" Vincent asked. It was the only question that mattered now. Everything else, all his assumptions, all his confident certainty about the world and his place in it, had crumbled in the space of 3 minutes. The woman studied him for a moment. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to hear her answer. Even the waiters had stopped pretending to work, standing at the edges of the gathering with their trays forgotten. "My name is Elena Petrov," she said simply. The name meant nothing to most people there. Why would it? These were business owners and socialites, people who bought tickets to concerts because it was the fashionable thing to do, not because they followed the careers of classical musicians. But Vincent felt something stir in his memory. The name was familiar, tickling the edge of his consciousness like a half-remembered dream. "Elena Petrov," he repeated slowly. Then it hit him. His eyes went wide. "Wait, not the Elena Petrov? From Moscow Conservatory?" She nodded once, a small gesture that confirmed everything. Vincent felt his legs go weak. He'd heard stories about Elena Petrov in music school years ago. His professors had mentioned her name in hushed, reverent tones. She'd been a legend, a prodigy who'd emerged from Moscow's most prestigious music academy in the late 80s. Critics had written that she didn't just play the piano, she spoke through it. She'd been compared to the greats, to Horowitz and Rubinstein. Her career had been taking off like a rocket, and then she'd vanished. Just disappeared from the concert circuit with no explanation. Vincent had assumed she'd died or gotten sick, or suffered some kind of injury that ended her career. That's what usually happened when promising musicians suddenly stopped performing. But here she stood, alive in a cheap dress at a charity event, her hands worn from work that had nothing to do with piano keys. "I don't understand," Vincent said, and for once he wasn't performing for the crowd. The confusion and shock in his voice were completely genuine. "What happened? Where have you been?" Elena's eyes moved past him to the piano, and something soft crossed her face. "Life happened," she said. "Life always happens, doesn't it?" "But you were brilliant," Vincent insisted. "Everyone said you were going to be one of the greatest pianists of your generation. You had concerts booked, recording contracts, everything." "I did," Elena agreed. 32 years ago I had all of those things." The number stunned Vincent. 32 years. More than 3 decades since she'd walked away from a career that most musicians would kill for. The crowd murmured, doing the math themselves, trying to imagine that much time passing. A woman in an emerald dress spoke up from the crowd. "Why did you stop?" Her voice carried genuine curiosity now, all traces of earlier mockery gone. Elena took a breath as if deciding how much to share. "My husband became ill," she said finally.
"Very ill."
The treatments were expensive. They weren't covered by insurance, and we had no family with money to help. I had a choice to make. She said it so simply, like it was the most obvious decision in the world. But Vincent understood the weight behind those words. She'd chosen love over art, family over fame. She'd walked away from everything she'd worked for, everything she'd been born to do because someone she loved needed her. "I started teaching piano to children," Elena continued. "That helped for a while. But as my husband got worse, I needed more money faster, so I took other work. Cleaning offices at night, washing dishes in restaurants. Whatever would pay the bills and still let me care for him during the day." The hall had gone completely silent again. But this silence was different from before. It wasn't anticipation or cruel amusement. It was respect mixed with shame. These wealthy people, standing in their designer clothes, drinking champagne that cost more than Elena probably made in a week, finally understood who they'd been laughing at. "How long?" Vincent asked quietly. "He passed away 6 years ago," Elena said. Her voice didn't waver, but Vincent saw her grip tighten slightly on her water glass. "By then I was 61 years old. Too old to start a concert career again, even if I'd wanted to. Too old for most music schools to hire. And honestly, I was too tired." "But you kept playing," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. No one could play like that without constant practice, without keeping their skills sharp. Elena smiled slightly. "I have an old upright piano in my apartment. The landlord lets me play if I keep the volume down, usually late at night when I can't sleep. The piano is out of tune, missing a few keys, but it's mine. That's enough." Vincent thought about his own piano at home, a Steinway grand that cost more than most people's cars, kept in perfect condition by a professional tuner who came every month. He'd always thought of it as a tool, necessary for his work. But the way Elena talked about her broken-down upright, it sounded like she was describing a dear friend. "What are you doing here tonight?" someone in the crowd asked. Elena's smile turned slightly embarrassed. "I clean this building," she said. "The concert hall, the offices upstairs, the reception area. I was here earlier today, making everything perfect for tonight. I should have left, but I heard them setting up the piano for the reception, and I couldn't help myself. I wanted to see it, to be close to it." She looked at the Steinway grand behind Vincent, and her expression held such longing that it hurt to see. "Instruments like this, I don't usually get to touch them. I know I shouldn't have stayed, but I thought if I just stood here quietly, no one would notice." The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. She'd been standing there, admiring the piano from a distance like a child pressing their nose against a toy store window, knowing they could never have what was inside, and he'd humiliated her for it. He'd turned her quiet moment of appreciation into a spectacle for his own amusement. "I'm sorry," Vincent said. The words felt completely inadequate, but they were all he had. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You thought I was nobody," Elena finished for him, not unkindly. Just another person in a cheap dress who didn't belong. It's all right. Most people think that, but it wasn't all right. Vincent knew that. Everyone in that hall knew that. What he'd done was cruel, born from arrogance and the assumption that his fame and success made him better than others. He'd judged Elena entirely on her appearance, never considering that there might be a story behind her worn clothes and work-roughened hands. A man in the crowd stepped forward. He was older, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair and an expensive watch. "I remember you," he said to Elena. "I saw you perform in Berlin in 1992. You played Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard." Elena's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You were there?" "Front row," the man confirmed. "I was a young music student then, visiting from America. That performance inspired me to keep studying, even when things got difficult. I've spent my whole career trying to teach my students to play with even a fraction of the passion you showed that night." More people began speaking up. A woman remembered hearing Elena on the radio in Moscow. A younger man said his grandmother had owned one of Elena's rare recordings and played it constantly. Even those who'd never heard of her before tonight understood that they were standing in the presence of someone special. Someone whose talent transcended money and status and all the superficial markers they'd used to judge her. Vincent stood there, watching Elena's face as people shared these memories. He saw surprise, pleasure, and sadness all mixed together. These people were describing the life she'd lost, the career she'd sacrificed. Every kind word was also a reminder of what could have been. "I should go," Elena said, setting down her water glass. "I shouldn't be here." "This is your evening, Mr. Laurent. I don't want to take away from that." "No," Vincent said firmly. "Please don't go." "Not yet." He turned to face the crowd, his mind racing. An idea was forming, something that might begin to make up for his terrible behavior. It wouldn't erase what he'd done, but it might at least honor the woman he'd tried to mock. "Everyone," he said, his voice carrying the authority he usually reserved for concert announcements. "I think we need to make a change to tonight's program." Elena looked at him in confusion. The crowd waited to hear what the famous pianist would say next. And Vincent, for the first time in his career, prepared to do something that had nothing to do with his own glory, and everything to do with making things right. Vincent watched Elena's face carefully as he spoke to the crowd. He saw confusion there and something that looked like worry. She took a small step backward, as if preparing to leave quickly if needed. "Tonight's program was supposed to feature only me," Vincent continued, addressing the gathered guests. "But I think we all just witnessed something extraordinary. Something that reminds us why music matters in the first place. It's not about fame or prestige or expensive concert tickets. It's about the human spirit finding expression through sound." He turned to Elena. "Would you consider performing tonight? The full concert. Not here in the reception area, but in the main hall on the stage for everyone?" The request hung in the air. Elena's eyes went wide and she shook her head immediately. "No," she said. "I can't. I don't have the right clothes. I haven't prepared anything. I couldn't possibly." "You just played one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire from memory," Vincent interrupted gently, "without warm-up on an instrument you'd never touched before in front of hostile strangers. If you can do that, you can do anything." "But this is your night," Elena protested. "People paid to hear you." "I'm nobody." "You're Elena Petrov," Vincent said firmly. "And 30 years ago, critics called you one of the most talented pianists of your generation. Tonight you proved they were right. Please, let people hear you play again." The crowd began to murmur in agreement. The woman in emerald spoke up again. "I'd much rather hear you than him, honestly." She shot Vincent an apologetic look. No offense, Vincent didn't take offense. She was right. What Elena had just done in 3 minutes surpassed anything Vincent had accomplished in his last 10 performances. He'd been playing perfectly technically, hitting every note exactly as written, but Elena had played with soul. There was a difference, and tonight had made that difference painfully clear. Elena looked around at all the expectant faces. "I don't even know what I would play," she said weakly. "Play whatever's in your heart," Vincent suggested. "Play what you've been playing alone on your out-of-tune piano at midnight. Play what you've been saving up for all these years." For a long moment, Elena didn't respond. Her eyes moved to the Steinway Grand, still sitting there like a patient friend. Vincent could see the war happening inside her, want versus fear, Opportunity versus self-doubt. The life she'd lost versus the life she'd chosen. "Tell us more about your story," the older man who'd seen her perform in Berlin said gently. "Help us understand." Elena looked at him, then at the crowd, then down at her worn hands. When she started speaking again, her voice was soft, but in the quiet hall, everyone heard every word. "I was 8 years old when I first touched a piano," she began. "In Soviet Russia, at a school in a poor neighborhood. The piano was falling apart and the teacher was old and strict. But when I played my first scale, something clicked inside me. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before." Vincent listened, fascinated. His own introduction to piano had been through expensive private lessons in a comfortable suburban home. He'd never had to fight for access to an instrument. "By 12, I was winning competitions," Elena continued. "By 15, the Moscow Conservatory accepted me. It was rare, especially for a girl from my background. My parents were factory workers. They didn't understand music, but they were proud. They sacrificed everything so I could study." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "The training was brutal. 12 hours a day at the piano, sometimes more. My teachers pushed me harder than anyone else. They said I had a gift, but gifts weren't enough. I needed discipline, perfection, absolute dedication. So that's what I gave them." Vincent thought about his own music education. It had been rigorous, certainly, but nothing like what Elena described. He'd always had the option to quit if it got too hard. For Elena, quitting probably wasn't a choice. Not when her whole family had invested everything in her success. "At 19, I gave my first professional concert," Elena said. "In Moscow, at a real concert hall. I played Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff. The reviewers wrote kind things. Doors started opening. More concerts, better venues, recording opportunities. By the time I was 25, I was touring internationally." Her expression became wistful, remembering. "I met my husband during a tour in Prague. He was a violinist, not famous like I was becoming, but talented. Kind. He made me laugh, which was something I'd almost forgotten how to do after years of intense training. We married within a year." Vincent saw several women in the crowd smile at that. Even in sadness, there was beauty in Elena's story. "For a while, everything was perfect," Elena continued. "We performed together sometimes. We talked about starting a chamber music group. We had plans, dreams. And then, when I was 31 and at the peak of my career, he got sick." The hall seemed to lean in, waiting. "At first, we thought it was just fatigue from touring," Elena said. "But it got worse. The doctors ran tests. Rare autoimmune disease, they said. Treatable, but expensive. Very expensive. And this was the early 90s, right after the Soviet Union fell apart. Everything was chaos. The safety nets we'd relied on were gone." She looked down at her hands. "I had insurance through the orchestra I played with, but it didn't cover experimental treatments. The doctor said traditional medicine would help, but not cure him. The treatments that might actually work were only available in Western Europe and America, and they cost more than I'd made in my entire career." Vincent felt a weight settling in his chest. He could see where this was going. "I had a choice to make," Elena said. "Keep touring, keep performing, and watch my husband die, or stop everything and find a way to pay for his treatment. Some people said I should choose my career. They said he would want that it was a waste for someone with my talent to give it all up. Maybe they were right. But when I looked at him, when I held his hand, there was no choice. Not really." A few people in the crowd were openly crying now. Even the man in the expensive suit who'd laughed earlier looked ashamed, staring at the floor. "So I stopped performing," Elena said simply. "I started teaching piano to wealthy children in their homes. The pay was better than concert work, though not enough. I took on more students, then cleaning jobs at night. Office buildings mostly. I could work while my husband slept, be there during the day when he needed me." "Did the treatments work?" someone asked quietly. Elena nodded. "For a while, yes. We got 5 more years together. 5 years where he could walk, could play his violin sometimes, could be himself. They were hard years, full of hospitals and worry, but they were ours. I don't regret choosing them." Vincent tried to imagine making that choice, walking away from everything he'd built, Everything he'd worked for to take care of someone else. Could he have done it? He honestly didn't know. When he died, Elena continued, I was 61 years old. I'd been away from the concert world for so long that people had forgotten me. The few who remembered thought I was dead. I tried teaching again, but music schools wanted young teachers with recent performance experience. Private students wanted teachers who were currently successful, whose credentials they could brag about. She smiled sadly. I'd become invisible, just another old woman with a foreign accent doing the jobs nobody else wanted to do. And the truth is, I was too tired to fight anymore. I'd used up all my fight keeping my husband alive. But you kept playing, the woman in emerald said. I had to, Elena replied. Playing piano isn't something you do, not for people like me, it's something you are. I found a cheap apartment with a landlord who let me have a piano. It's old, doesn't stay in tune, missing some keys. But late at night when I can't sleep, I play. Not for anyone else, just for me. Just to remember who I used to be. The honesty of it, the raw vulnerability, left everyone speechless. This wasn't a dramatic story about fame and fortune lost. This was a story about ordinary sacrifice, about choosing love over ambition, about continuing to create beauty even when no one was watching. Vincent looked at Elena with new eyes. He'd spent his whole career chasing recognition, building his reputation, making sure everyone knew his name. He played for audiences and critics and recording contracts. But Elena had played for 3 decades, with no audience at all except herself, and possibly whatever ghosts kept her company in her small apartment at midnight. Who was the real musician? The one who performed for thousands and got paid handsomely for it? Or the one who played alone in the dark, for free, just because the music demanded to be played? I think, Vincent said slowly, that everyone here needs to hear you perform tonight, not as a favor to you, but as a gift to us. We need to remember what real music sounds like when it comes from someone who plays because they must, not because it's their job. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. The main concert hall looked different when Elena walked onto the stage. Vincent watched from the wings as she approached the grand piano positioned at the center. The same people who'd laughed at her an hour ago now sat in rapt attention, filling every seat in the hall. Someone had found her a simple black concert dress that fit reasonably well. It wasn't designer, just something borrowed from a staff member, but it was appropriate. Elena had refused makeup or elaborate preparation. I play piano, she'd said simply. Everything else is just decoration. Vincent stood beside the stage manager, his scheduled performance forgotten. The evening's program had been completely rewritten. Instead of Vincent playing his carefully rehearsed Rachmaninoff, the audience would hear Elena Petrov playing whatever she chose, for the first time in over 30 years. Elena sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. Her movements were unhurried, comfortable. She'd done this thousands of times before, in halls much grander than this one. Vincent saw her take a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling, then her hands moved to the keys. She started with something unexpected. Not the revolutionary Chopin she'd played earlier, but something gentler. Schumann's Scenes from Childhood. Simple melodies that any intermediate student could technically play, but infused with such warmth and memory that they became something else entirely. Music about innocence and loss, about looking back at what used to be. Vincent felt tears prick his eyes. He wasn't alone. Around the hall, people who'd come expecting a polished, professional performance found themselves moved by something deeper. This wasn't about technical perfection. This was about a lifetime of experience poured into every note. Elena played for 45 minutes without stopping. She moved from Schumann to Brahms, then to pieces Vincent didn't immediately recognize. Perhaps Russian composers, music from her childhood. Her hands never faltered. Her concentration never broke. She was completely present in the music, and the music was completely present in her. When she finished, the final notes faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the applause started, and it didn't stop. People stood clapping until their hands were sore, many with tears streaming down their faces. The ovation went on for 5 full minutes. Elena stood and took a simple bow. No flourishes, no grand gestures, just acknowledgement of the audience's appreciation. Then she walked off stage, leaving the piano sitting empty in the spotlight. Vincent caught up with her backstage. "That was incredible," he said. The words felt inadequate. Elena smiled. "It felt good to play for people again. I'd forgotten how different it feels when you're sharing the music instead of just playing it alone." "About what I did earlier?" Vincent started. But Elena held up her hand. "You didn't know," she said. "And honestly, if you hadn't pushed me, I never would have had the courage to play. Sometimes we need someone to challenge us, even if their motives aren't pure." Vincent didn't feel he deserved her forgiveness, but he accepted it. "What will you do now?" he asked. Elena shrugged. "Go home, go back to work tomorrow. This was a beautiful evening, but it doesn't change my life. I'm still just an old woman with bills to pay." "What if it could change your life?" Vincent said suddenly. An idea had been forming in his mind during her performance. "What if we started something together?" Elena looked at him skeptically. "What do you mean?" "A music school," Vincent said, the words tumbling out now as the idea took shape. "For kids who can't afford regular lessons. Kids like you were, from families that don't have money for expensive training. You could teach them. I could help fund it, bring in other teachers, provide instruments." "That's a lovely dream," Elena said gently, "but dreams like that require more money than either of us have." "Maybe," Vincent admitted. "But what if we could raise it? I have connections, wealthy donors, foundations, and after tonight, after your story gets out, people will want to help. I know they will." Elena studied his face, looking for sincerity. Vincent met her gaze steadily. He meant every word. This wasn't about assuaging his guilt, though that was part of it. This was about doing something meaningful with his privilege and connections. "Why would you do this?" Elena asked. Vincent thought about the question. "Because tonight I learned that I've been playing piano for all the wrong reasons," he said honestly. "I've been chasing fame and recognition. I've been using music to make myself feel important. But you've been using music to stay human, to remember who you are, to keep beauty alive in a difficult world. That's the difference between a performer and an artist. I want to help create more artists like you." Elena's eyes grew wet. "That's very kind," she whispered. "It's not kind," Vincent corrected. "It's necessary. For me as much as for anyone." Over the next few weeks, Vincent's idea took on a life of its own. The charity event had been filmed by multiple guests on their phones. Videos of Elena's performance went viral on social media. News outlets picked up the story of the famous pianist who'd mocked a cleaning woman, only to discover she was a legendary musician herself. The narrative wrote itself. Redemption, second chances, hidden talent. The arrogance of privilege meeting the humility of sacrifice. People couldn't get enough of it. Donations started pouring in, small amounts from regular people who'd seen the videos and been moved. Larger amounts from wealthy patrons who wanted to be part of something meaningful. Within a month, Vincent and Elena had raised enough money to open their first location. They found a building in a struggling neighborhood, the kind of area where kids grew up never imagining they could learn classical music. The building had been a community center once, abandoned for years. With donations and volunteer labor, they transformed it into a proper music school. Elena insisted they call it Second Movement, instead of putting anyone's name on it. "Because everyone deserves a chance at a second movement in their life symphony," she explained. Vincent recruited teachers from his network, not just technically skilled musicians, but people who understood that music was about more than hitting the right notes. They offered free lessons to any child who wanted them. No auditions, no prerequisites, just a willingness to learn. The school opened 6 months after that fateful charity event. 30 students enrolled in the first week. Within a year, they had 200. Within 3 years, they'd opened 5 more locations across the city. Elena taught every day. She worked with the youngest students, the ones just learning to find middle C on the keyboard. With the same patience and dedication she'd once brought to preparing for concerts in Berlin and Moscow. Vincent watched her sometimes, saw the joy on her face when a student finally mastered a difficult passage. "This is better than performing," she told him once. "When I played concerts, the music ended when I left the stage. But this keeps going. These children will play for the rest of their lives. They'll teach their children. The music multiplies." Vincent had changed too. He still performed, still gave concerts, but he'd cut back his schedule significantly. He spent more time teaching at Second Movement, working with advanced students who showed real promise. He'd learned to value the process over the performance, the journey over the destination. The moment that had started with cruelty had transformed into something beautiful. Not because Vincent had suddenly become a better person, but because Elena had shown him what real artistry looked like. Not the kind that sought applause, but the kind that persisted in silence. Not the kind that demanded recognition, but the kind that gave freely without expecting anything in return. 5 years after that first performance, Second Movement held its annual recital. The concert hall was packed with parents and friends, community members and donors. Students ranging from 6 to 60 years old performed pieces they'd learned over the year. Vincent sat in the audience this time, not on stage. He watched as a 12-year-old girl played the same Chopin etude Elena had performed that first night. The girl was nervous, missed a few notes, but the passion was there. The determination to make something beautiful despite the difficulty. Elena stood in the wings watching with Vincent. "She reminds me of myself at that age," she said softly. "Does she have the talent to go professional?" Vincent asked. Elena shook her head. "Probably not. But that's not the point, is it? She's learning discipline, persistence, how to express emotion through art. Whether she becomes a concert pianist or an accountant who plays for fun on weekends, music will enrich her whole life. That's what matters." Vincent nodded. He understood now. Success wasn't about filling concert halls or getting standing ovations. Success was about a kid in a struggling neighborhood learning that beauty was accessible to them, that they could create something meaningful with their own hands. After the recital, donors mingled with students and families. The woman in the emerald dress from that first night approached Elena. "I've been supporting Second Movement since it started," she said. "My daughter takes lessons here now. She loves it." "I'm glad," Elena said warmly. "I wanted to apologize," the woman continued, "for laughing that night. I was cruel and I'm sorry." Elena took her hand. "You helped us get here," she said simply. "Sometimes good things come from painful moments. I forgive you." I forgave everyone that night. Vincent thought about forgiveness often. Elena had forgiven him immediately, without making him grovel or prove himself. That forgiveness had been a gift, one he'd spent years trying to earn retroactively. He'd learned that privilege wasn't just about money or fame. It was about access, opportunity, the assumption that you belonged in fancy spaces. He'd wielded his privilege like a weapon that night, using it to make someone feel small. But privilege could also be a tool. He could open doors for people who'd otherwise be locked out. He could use his name and connections to create opportunities. That's what Second Movement represented. A conscious choice to use privilege for something beyond self-promotion. 10 years after that first performance, Elena received an honorary doctorate from Moscow Conservatory. They wanted to recognize her contributions to music education. She accepted the honor, flew to Russia for the ceremony, and gave a speech that brought the audience to tears. "I thought I lost my chance at music when I chose to care for my husband," she told them. "But I learned that music isn't about concerts and applause. It's about what we carry inside us. I played alone for 30 years, and those were still musical years. When you love music deeply enough, no one can take it away from you." Vincent sat in the audience at that ceremony, clapping until his hands hurt. He thought about the arrogant man he'd been, so sure of his own importance. That man had died the night Elena sat at the piano and changed everything. The school continued growing. By its 15th year, Second Movement had expanded to 20 locations across multiple cities. Thousands of students had passed through their doors. Some went on to professional music careers. Most didn't. But all of them carried something with them, the knowledge that they were capable of creating beauty, that their background didn't define their potential. That art belonged to everyone, not just the privileged few. Elena kept teaching until she was 82 years old. Even then, she only stopped because her hands finally betrayed her, arthritis making it painful to demonstrate techniques. She transitioned to mentoring young teachers instead, passing on not just musical knowledge but wisdom about patience, dedication, and the true purpose of art. She died peacefully in her sleep at 85. Surrounded by former students who'd become like family, her funeral was held in